For this lesson, you need to open the sample file Earnings Summary 1 from your Sample Files folder. This lesson introduces the IF function. The IF function is one of Excel's most widely used and useful functions. This worksheet models a payroll, and you can see the payroll rules in rows 4 to 6. All hours up to 35 hours per week are paid at the hourly rate, but hours over 35 hours per week are paid at time and a half. That's 150% of the hourly rate. And if the employee's sales are above target, they're paid a bonus of 5% on the sales value that's above target. We're going to use 3 IF functions in order to calculate the standard pay, overtime pay, and bonus for this payroll. Let's begin with the standard pay. So I click in cell F9 and then Formulas tab on the ribbon. In the function library group, the IF function is a logical function. So I'll click Logical, and there's the IF function. And the function arguments dialog appears. The IF function has a logical test that returns true or false. If the test returns true, the value if true argument is evaluated. And if the test returns false, the value if false argument is evaluated. We need to calculate standard pay. So let's consider Jack Nicholson. Jack has worked for 30 hours, so his standard pay will be 30 hours worked multiplied by his $13 hourly rate. And now let's consider Brad Cruz. He's worked for 40 hours, so he'll be paid 35 hours at his normal hourly rate of $15 and 5 hours at his overtime rate. So in the case of Brad, his standard pay will be 35 hours at $15. So the logical test will be whether the employee has worked for less than 35 hours. So I'll click on the number of hours worked by Brad, that's cell E9, and then the operator will be less than or equal to 35. And you can see that in Brad's case, this is returning false, because Brad worked more than 35 hours. Now let's consider the value if true. If it's true that the employee has worked for less than 35 hours, then his standard pay will simply be the number of hours worked multiplied by the hourly rate. So I'll click on the hours worked and multiplied by the hourly rate. And now let's consider the value if false. If it is not true that the employee has worked less than 35 hours, another way of saying the employee worked for more than 35 hours, then 35 of those hours will be paid at standard pay. So the answer will be 35 multiplied by, and then I'll click on the hourly rate in D9. I'll now click the OK button, and I'll autofill the formula down to the end of the range. And I can see that in the case of Jack Nicholson, who's worked for 30 hours, I'm correctly getting the result 390, which is 30 times 13. And in the case of Brad Cruz, who's worked for 40 hours, I'd expect 35 of those hours to be paid at standard pay. And 35 times $15 is indeed $525. So I can see that the IF function is returning the standard pay values correctly. Let's now consider overtime pay. So I'll click in cell G9, again Formulas Function Library Group Logical, and the IF function. And the logical test this time will be exactly the same as last time, because only employees that work for more than 35 hours will get any overtime pay. So the logical test is the hours worked, I'll click on hours worked, is less than or equal to 35. Now let's consider what happens if that's true. If it's true that the employees worked for less than 35 hours, then clearly they don't get any overtime pay, so the value will be 0. But if it's not true, then it's only those hours above 35 hours that will be paid at overtime rates. So I'll open a bracket and click the hours worked, and then I'll subtract 35 from the hours worked and close the bracket. That's the number of hours worked above 35. And you can see that in Brad's case, that's 5 hours of overtime. So I need to multiply this by his hourly rate. I click on D9. And because this is paid at overtime rate, I then need to multiply by 1.5, which will pay him time and a half. I click the OK button, and then I'll autofill down to the end of the range again. And you can see that only the employees that worked for more than 35 hours are receiving any overtime pay. And in Brad Cruz's case, the 5 hours of overtime are being paid at hourly rate times 1.5. That's 5 times 15, 75, and add half again, and that brings us to 112.50. So the overtime pay is also being correctly calculated. And now let's consider the bonus. So I click in cell H9, once again formulas, function library, logical, and the if function. And the logical test for bonus is whether sales are above target. So I'll click on sales, and then greater than operator, target. And in Brad's case, you can see this is returning true, because Brad's sales are $12,000 above target. Now let's consider what happens if the employee's sales are above target. Well, they get paid 5% of the sales value that's above target. So I'll open a bracket and click on the sales. Then I'll subtract the target, and this is paid at 5%, so multiplied by 5%. And I can see that Brad is earning $600 on his sales of $12,000 above target. What happens if the sales are not greater than target? Well, the employee earns no bonus, so this is 0. I click OK, and then I'll autofill to the end of the range, and you can see that only the employees whose sales were above target are being paid bonus, and that bonus is being paid at 5% of sales above target. Now let's compute the total that each employee will receive. This is a simple sum function. So I'll click in I9, type equals SU, down arrow key twice to move to sum, tab key to finish the sum function off, and I'll use the mouse to drag across standard pay, overtime pay, and bonus. And when I press the enter key, you can see that Brad Cruz earned $1,237.50 this week. Let's autofill to the end of the range, and we can see the earnings for each of our employees. All that remains now is to save your work, and I'm going to save with the new name Earnings Summary 2. And as usual, I'll save to the folder above my sample files folder. I click the Save button, and you've now completed Lesson 3.5. Use the if logic function.